1 month after that fateful night, the CEO stood at a podium in front of City Hall. The crowd before him wasn't angry or hostile, they were hopeful. In his hand, he held the draft of a new initiative that would change how police interactions were monitored and reviewed in their city. "Change doesn't always come from conflict," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Sometimes it comes from turning difficult moments into opportunities." The same officers who had stopped him that night sat in the front row, not as opponents but as partners in a new training program that would reshape police-community relations. His company had grown in unexpected ways since the incident. The security software that had protected him that night was now being implemented in police training programs across the state. Every patrol car was equipped with AI-driven cameras that didn't just record interactions, they provided real-time feedback to help officers make better decisions in the field. But the biggest change wasn't in the technology, it was in the hearts and minds of people. The story had spread, not as another tale of injustice, but as an example of how progress could emerge from difficulty. Local business owners, inspired by his response to the incident, had joined forces to create a community fund for legal aid and police reform initiatives. "When they put those handcuffs on me," he continued, looking out at the sea of faces, "I had a choice. I could let anger take over, or I could channel that moment into something bigger than myself." The crowd nodded in understanding. They'd seen the viral videos, watched the footage from multiple angles, witnessed how technology and dignity could combine to create justice. His mother sat in the front row, tears of pride in her eyes. Her flower shop had become a symbol of the community's resilience, a place where police officers now stopped by regularly to chat with residents, building bridges that should have existed long ago. The old Mercedes still sat in her parking lot some days, a reminder that success didn't have to mean leaving your roots behind. The youth center he'd been planning before the incident had evolved into something more, a technology and justice center where young people learned not just coding and business skills, but their rights and responsibilities as citizens. The same Tesla owners who had witnessed his ordeal now volunteered there, teaching kids about how technology could be a force for positive change. "Today," he announced, holding up the initiative document, "we're not just changing policies, we're changing perspectives." The new program would provide free security cameras to small businesses in underserved neighborhoods, create a civilian review board equipped with AI-driven analysis tools, and establish a scholarship fund for young people interested in both law enforcement and technology. The police chief stepped forward to sign the agreement, followed by community leaders and tech industry representatives. This wasn't just a local change. Other cities were already reaching out, wanting to implement similar programs. The incident that could have ended in tragedy had instead sparked a revolution in police accountability and community relations. As he wrapped up his speech, the CEO looked at his phone. Another Tesla had just captured footage of a police interaction gone right, where an officer had remembered his training and turned a potential confrontation into a conversation. These small victories were adding up, creating a new normal where technology served as a silent guardian of justice. "We all want the same thing," he concluded, gesturing to the diverse crowd before him. "A community where success is celebrated, mistakes are learned from, and every person is treated with dignity. Sometimes it takes a difficult moment to show us the way forward, but it's what we do with that moment that defines who we are." The applause that followed wasn't just for him, it was for every person who had ever faced injustice and chosen to respond with wisdom rather than anger. As he stepped down from the podium, his mother wrapped him in a tight hug. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. "You didn't just prove them wrong, you helped make things right." Walking back to his car, the same Mercedes that had been searched that night, he smiled at the Tesla parked next to it. Its cameras blinked silently, a reminder that in this new world, justice had some unexpected allies. Sometimes, he realized, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's making sure others don't have to go through what you did. That's the truest form of karma. The atmosphere on the street had shifted dramatically. What started as a routine traffic stop had transformed into something that would change lives forever. As the CEO's legal team displayed the crystal-clear footage from multiple Tesla cameras, the officer's confident demeanor crumbled like a sandcastle in the rain. "As you can see," the lead attorney explained, her tablet showing synchronized videos from different angles, "our client made a complete stop. We have footage from 7 different vehicles, all showing the same thing. She swiped through the videos, each one telling the same story. There had been no traffic violation, no probable cause, nothing to justify the stop. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, his hand no longer resting on his weapon. "We were just following protocol," he muttered, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. The CEO, still sitting on the curb with his hands cuffed, spoke up with the same calm authority he used in board meetings. "Protocol is important," he said, watching as more Tesla owners from the neighborhood gathered around. "But so is justice, so is dignity, so is truth." Each word carried weight, not from anger, but from a deep understanding of the moment's significance. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been wrongfully stopped, who didn't have an army of electric cars watching their back. His legal team worked quickly, documenting everything. Photos of the scattered papers in his car, the position of the police vehicles, the handcuffs that still bound his wrists. Every detail would matter later, not for revenge, but for reform. One of the lawyers was already on the phone with the police chief, her voice firm but professional as she explained the situation. The growing crowd of neighbors, many of them Tesla owners whose cars had captured the incident, stood in quiet solidarity. These were the same people who knew him as the tech CEO, who funded the local youth center, who helped modernize the neighborhood's infrastructure, who never forgot his roots despite his success. "Remove those handcuffs," a commanding voice cut through the night air. A high-ranking police official had arrived on the scene, having been summoned by the legal team. He looked at the footage, then at his officers, his face a mask of professional concern. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a PR nightmare unfolding in real time, captured by dozens of cameras. As the handcuffs came off, the CEO stood up slowly, straightening his suit jacket with dignity. His wrists bore red marks from the restraints, but his spirit was unbowed. He looked at the officers, not with hatred, but with determination. "We have an opportunity here," he said, addressing everyone present. "An opportunity to show how technology can bring accountability, how justice can prevail without violence." The police official stepped forward, his badge catching the streetlight. "On behalf of the department, I want to express our deepest apologies." But the CEO raised his hand gently, stopping him mid-sentence. "Apologies are important," he said, "but actions matter more. Let's talk about how we can prevent this from happening to someone else." His legal team was already outlining a plan, not for a lawsuit, but for reform. The CEO's company would offer their security software to the police department for training purposes. Every wrongful stop, every biased decision could become a learning opportunity. The very technology that had protected him could help protect others. The officers who had stopped him stood awkwardly to the side, their earlier authority replaced by the uncomfortable realization that they had become an example not just of what was wrong, but of what needed to change. The CEO looked at them thoughtfully, remembering all the times he'd been stopped before, all the times he didn't have technology on his side. As his legal team finished gathering evidence, the CEO pulled out his phone and made a call. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm going to be a little late for dinner. But I think you'll want to hear this story." Sometimes, he added, looking at the crowd of supporters around him, the worst moments bring out the best opportunities for change. The universe has a funny way of preparing us for moments we never expect. As the CEO sat on the curb, hands cuffed behind his back, he remembered a conversation from 3 months ago that now seemed almost prophetic. His tech team had approached him with an idea to partner with electric car companies, developing security software that would turn their built-in cameras into a neighborhood watch system. At the time, it had seemed like just another good business decision. Now, as he watched the 5th Tesla drive slowly past the scene, he knew it was something more. Each car was equipped with his company's latest software upgrade, multiple cameras recording everything within a 100-foot radius, automatically uploading the footage to secure cloud storage. The officers were still searching his car, tossing aside expensive leather folders and technical documents like they were yesterday's newspapers. They had no idea that every moment of their unauthorized search was being captured from multiple angles by the very technology that had made their suspect a millionaire. "Found anything interesting yet?" he called out, his voice carrying a hint of knowing confidence that made both officers pause. They turned to look at him, probably wondering why someone in handcuffs sounded so calm. The first officer frowned, clearly unsettled by his captive's lack of anxiety. Just then, another Tesla rolled by, this one moving particularly slowly. The CEO recognized it. It belonged to one of his senior developers who lived in the neighborhood. Through the car's tinted windows, he could see his colleague's concerned face. A slight nod passed between them, unnoticed by the officers. His phone buzzed softly on the ground beside him. Text messages were pouring in. The footage was already spreading through his company's secure network. Every Tesla that passed had captured crystal clear video of him making a complete stop at the sign, the very violation he'd been accused of. The timestamps were perfect, the angles were clear, and most importantly, the truth was undeniable. The sound of car doors slamming echoed down the street. 2 sleek black SUVs had pulled up, and from them emerged his company's legal team. They moved with purpose, tablets in hand, already pulling up video footage from multiple angles. The CEO couldn't help but smile. He'd hired them for exactly this kind of situation, though he'd hoped he'd never need them. "Officers," the lead attorney called out, her voice sharp and professional, "I believe you'll want to see this." She held up her tablet, displaying perfectly clear footage from 3 different Teslas. The video showed the CEO's Mercedes coming to a complete stop at the intersection, waiting the full 3 seconds, then proceeding carefully. The timestamp matched exactly with the time of the alleged violation. The officers' faces changed as they watched the footage. The color drained from their cheeks as they realized their mistake and its implications. Not only had they wrongfully detained a prominent business leader, but they'd done so in a neighborhood filled with cars equipped with his company's security technology. More Teslas were arriving now, forming a loose circle around the scene. Each car's cameras continued recording, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. The officers looked increasingly uncomfortable, suddenly aware that they were starring in a video that would likely become evidence in a much bigger case. "I think," the CEO said, still sitting calmly on the curb, "it's time we had a conversation about proper police procedure and the role of technology in ensuring accountability." His voice wasn't angry or triumphant. It carried the same measured tone he used in corporate negotiations. He knew that what happened next would be more important than the injustice he'd just experienced. The night had turned into something unexpected, not just another story of profiling gone wrong, but a powerful demonstration of how technology could level the playing field. As his legal team approached with the key to his handcuffs, he was already thinking about how this incident could lead to positive change. Sometimes the best karma isn't revenge. It's the opportunity to transform a moment of injustice into a catalyst for progress. The night air grew colder as the successful CEO stood beside his Mercedes, his phone steady in his hand, still recording. The officers had his license and registration, but that wasn't enough. "We're going to need to search your vehicle," the first officer announced, his tone suggesting it wasn't a request. "There's been a lot of suspicious activity in this area." The CEO kept his composure, though inside he felt a familiar mix of frustration and resignation. He'd been here before, different streets, different officers, same story. "Officers," he said calmly, his voice carrying the same authority he used in board meetings, "I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. I've done nothing wrong, and you've provided no probable cause." Years of business negotiations had taught him the power of staying calm under pressure. His words were measured, professional, chosen with the same care he used when speaking to investors. But this wasn't a boardroom, and his Harvard MBA carried little weight on this dark street corner. The second officer stepped closer, his stance aggressive. "Sir, if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem with us taking a quick look." The CEO's phone caught every word, every movement. He thought about the hundreds of employees who depended on him, about the community center he was building, about his mother who would worry if he was late for their weekly dinner. "I understand you're doing your job," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension, "but I know my rights. Unless you have probable cause or a warrant, I do not consent to a search." The words were familiar. He'd practiced them, hoped he'd never need them, but kept them ready just in case. The first officer's hand moved to his handcuffs. "Step back from the vehicle, sir. We smell something suspicious." The CEO almost laughed. His car probably smelled like the leather-bound notebooks he used in meetings and the coffee he'd had during his investor presentation. But he knew better than to argue. As the cool metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he kept his voice clear and calm, making sure his phone's microphone caught every word. "I want to be clear that I'm complying under protest. I've done nothing wrong, and this search is unauthorized." His suit jacket, the same one he'd worn while closing a multi-million-dollar deal hours earlier, now pressed uncomfortably against his back. They made him sit on the curb, right there on the pristine sidewalk of the neighborhood where he owned property and paid considerable taxes. The same curb he'd walked past countless times on his way to work, where neighborhood kids would wave to him as he passed by. Now he sat there, hands cuffed behind his back, while officers rummaged through his car. His mind wandered to the morning's events, the excited investors, the handshakes, the congratulations. He thought about the small business owners who would benefit from his company's new expansion, about the jobs he was creating, the lives he was changing. Yet here he sat, being treated like a criminal for driving his own car in his own neighborhood. Through the windows of his Mercedes, he could see the officers pulling apart his briefcase, spreading his contracts and presentations across the seat. The papers he'd spent hours preparing, the documents worth millions, now scattered like trash. His phone continued recording, propped carefully on the ground beside him, its lens capturing everything. More cars drove past slowly, their headlights illuminating the scene. He recognized several Teslas among them, vehicles equipped with multiple cameras, silently recording everything they saw. A small smile crossed his face as he remembered the security software his company had recently developed. Sometimes justice needed a little help from technology. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air. But these weren't police sirens. This was something else. His legal team was about to arrive, and they were bringing with them evidence that would turn this entire situation on its head. The officers didn't know it yet, but they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. The red and blue lights painted strange shadows on the pristine sidewalks of the upscale neighborhood. Two officers approached the Mercedes, their footsteps echoing in the quiet evening air. The successful tech CEO sat perfectly still, his hands visible on the steering wheel, just as his father had taught him all those years ago. His heart wasn't racing. This wasn't his first time in this situation. Instead, there was a familiar heaviness in his chest, a tired recognition of a scene he'd hoped his success might help him avoid. "You ran that stop sign back there," the first officer announced, shining his flashlight directly into the car. The beam swept across the elegant interior, lingering on the driver's expensive watch and well-tailored suit. The CEO kept his voice steady and respectful as he replied, "Sir, I'm certain I came to a complete stop. I always do, especially at that intersection." He knew that intersection well. It was just 2 blocks from his office. He remembered clearly how he'd stopped there, just as he did every day, counting to 3 before proceeding. It was a habit as natural as breathing, one of many small rituals he'd developed over the years to protect himself from exactly this kind of situation. The second officer circled the car slowly, his hand resting on his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for discussion. The CEO's mind raced through his options. He knew his rights, but he also knew the reality of his situation. Sometimes being right wasn't enough to keep you safe. With deliberate movements, he reached for his phone sitting in the cup holder. "Officers, I'm going to record this interaction for everyone's safety," he announced calmly, making sure his movements were slow and visible. The first officer's posture stiffened, but he couldn't legally object. The phone's screen lit up, its camera now capturing everything. As he stepped out of his car, the cool evening air hit his face. He stood tall, all 6 feet of him, dressed in the same suit he'd worn to close a multi-million-dollar deal just hours ago. The contrast wasn't lost on him. From the boardroom where his opinion was valued and sought after, to this street corner where he was just another suspicious character. "I need to see your license and registration," the first officer demanded. The CEO nodded. "They're in my glove compartment." "I'm going to reach for them now, if that's okay." He narrated each movement, a practiced dance he wished he'd never had to learn. His company ID badge was visible through his suit jacket, CEO of a tech company worth millions, but somehow, in this moment, that detail seemed to make the officers even more suspicious. The second officer's radio crackled with static, breaking the tense silence. A dispatcher's voice mentioned something about a suspicious vehicle in the area. The CEO almost wanted to laugh. His Mercedes was probably worth more than both police cars combined, yet here he was, being treated like a potential threat. "This is a nice car for this neighborhood," the first officer commented, studying the license and registration with exaggerated care. The CEO bit back the urge to mention that his office was just around the corner, that he employed over 100 people in this very area. Experience had taught him that such information rarely helped in these situations. Instead, he kept his voice level and professional, just as he would in any business meeting. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but I want to be clear. I did not run that stop sign. I stop there every day, and today was no different." His phone continued recording, its small red light a quiet witness to the scene unfolding. The officers exchanged glances, their hands still hovering near their weapons, despite his calm demeanor and obvious professionalism. The CEO noticed a Tesla driving by slowly, its multiple cameras probably capturing everything. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Technology had a way of revealing truth, one way or another. Little did these officers know that they had just pulled over someone who understood the power of digital evidence better than most. In their rush to profile him, they'd overlooked the most important detail. In today's world, the truth had a way of coming out, especially in neighborhoods filled with cars equipped with the latest security technology. As he stood there, watching the officers huddle together discussing something in hushed tones, he couldn't help but think about how this moment would soon become another story, not just about injustice, but about how technology and preparation could level the playing field in unexpected ways. The day had started like any other, with the usual buzz of excitement at the tech company's headquarters. The young CEO had just wrapped up one of the biggest meetings of his career, a partnership that would help millions of small businesses across the country. As he packed up his laptop and gathered his presentation materials, he could still hear the excitement in the investors' voices, their handshakes still warm in his memory. It was already getting dark outside, the kind of peaceful evening when the sky turns a gentle purple and the street lights start flickering to life. He checked his watch, 7:30 p.m. His mother would probably be closing up her flower shop right about now. Maybe he'd swing by and tell her about the good news. She always said nothing tasted better than success shared with family. The parking garage was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered here and there. His old Mercedes sat quietly in its usual spot, a familiar friend waiting to take him home. As he settled into the driver's seat, he took a moment to breathe in the leather scent that had somehow survived 5 years of daily use. The car might not turn heads anymore, but it held so many memories of his journey from startup dreamer to successful CEO. Pulling out onto the main road, he followed his usual route home. The streets were quiet, with just a few other cars sharing the road. He drove carefully, following every traffic rule to the letter. A habit born from years of experience and wisdom. Stop at every sign, signal every turn, keep exactly to the speed limit. His father had taught him these rules years ago, adding an extra lesson that shouldn't have been necessary but was crucial. "Son, when you look like us, you've got to be twice as careful." The radio played softly in the background, some old soul music that reminded him of Sunday afternoons at his grandparents' house. He hummed along, still riding high on the success of the day's meeting. The investors hadn't just liked his ideas. They'd loved them. Their enthusiasm meant his company could now help even more small business owners, people like his mother who worked hard every day to keep their dreams alive. Streetlights cast long shadows as he drove through the affluent neighborhood where his office was located. Despite his success, he sometimes still felt like an outsider here among the perfectly manicured lawns and grand houses. But he'd earned his place at the table, fair and square, through hard work and determination. His mind wandered to the community center he was planning to build. With this new investment, he could finally start that project, a place where kids from all backgrounds could learn about technology and business. He smiled, imagining the possibilities. Maybe some of those kids would be sitting in his chair someday, closing their own million-dollar deals. The dashboard clock showed 7:45 p.m. when he noticed the police cruiser in his rearview mirror. At first, he didn't think much of it, just another car on the road. But then he saw the familiar flash of red and blue lights reflecting off his side mirrors. His heart sank a little, even though he knew he'd done nothing wrong. Years of success hadn't changed this one simple reality. the nervous flutter in his stomach whenever he saw those lights in his mirror. He did everything by the book, just as he always did. Right turn signal on, slowly pulling over to the right side of the road, hands visible on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Through his rearview mirror, he could see 2 officers emerging from their vehicle, hands already resting on their weapons. The familiar weight of his success, his achievements, his contributions to society, none of that seemed to matter in this moment. As he sat there, waiting, he thought about how strange it was that on one of the best days of his career, he was about to face one of the most challenging situations any successful black professional dreads. But he was ready. He'd been here before, and he knew exactly what to do. In the heart of Silicon Valley, where dreams were built on lines of code and innovation, there lived a remarkable entrepreneur who had defied all odds. Growing up in a modest neighborhood with cracked sidewalks and small family-owned stores, this brilliant mind had transformed a simple idea into a tech empire worth millions. Starting from his parents' garage, just like many legendary tech founders before him, he spent countless nights typing away at his keyboard, fueled by nothing but instant noodles and determination. His breakthrough came when local shop owners kept complaining about how they couldn't keep track of their inventory properly. While bigger stores had fancy systems, small businesses were still using pen and paper. That's when it hit him, why not create something simple yet powerful? Something that even his mother, who ran a small flower shop, could use without getting confused by complicated tech terms. He poured his heart into developing an app that would feel as natural as writing in a notebook, but work as efficiently as high-end business software. The journey wasn't easy. Investors laughed at him initially, saying small businesses wouldn't pay for inventory software. But he knew better. He'd grown up watching these hard-working shop owners struggle. He'd seen his mother stay up late counting flowers and vases, trying to figure out what to order for the next day. Then came the breakthrough. A local grocery store owner tried his app and couldn't stop talking about how it saved him 3 hours every day. Word spread like wildfire through the small business community. Soon, shop owners from all over the city were calling, asking how they could get their hands on this magical solution. Despite now being worth $50 million, he never let success change who he was at heart. He still drove the same reliable Mercedes he bought when his company first started making profit. The car wasn't flashy. It was 5 years old and had a small dent in the back from when someone had bumped into him at a grocery store parking lot. But it reminded him of his first big achievement, and he couldn't bring himself to replace it. He chose to live in the same neighborhood where he grew up, in a modest house just 3 blocks from his parents. Every morning, he'd stop by his mom's flower shop, not in a fancy suit, but wearing simple jeans and a comfortable shirt. The local kids would wave at him as he passed by, knowing him as the friendly tech guy who sponsored their Little League team and helped set up computers at their school. The most remarkable thing about him wasn't his wealth, it was how he used it. Half of his company's profits went into creating free tech workshops for kids from low-income families. He believed that talent could be found anywhere, it just needed a chance to grow. His office wasn't in some gleaming skyscraper downtown, but in a renovated old warehouse where he'd installed a community center on the first floor. Every weekend, he'd sit with young aspiring entrepreneurs, sharing his knowledge over boxes of pizza. He'd tell them, your background doesn't define your future. What matters is the value you create for others. These weren't just empty words. He lived by them every single day. His story was living proof that success didn't have to change a person's values. The old Mercedes, the modest house, the regular visits to local shops, everything about him showed that staying true to yourself was more important than fitting into someone else's idea of success. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges even at those who seem to have it all figured out. And on one ordinary Friday evening, his world was about to be turned upside down in a way that would test everything he stood for.